The heavy glass doors swung open, letting in a gust of crisp autumn air. Amara Jackson stepped into the lobby of Riverside Tower, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. She adjusted the strap of her leather briefcase, a gift from her grandmother when she'd made partner at her law firm last year. The security guard behind the desk barely glanced up as she approached. "Good morning," Amara said, flashing a warm smile. "I have a 9 a.m. meeting with ID and visitor's pass." The guard interrupted, his voice gruff. He was new. Amara hadn't seen him before in her frequent visits to the building. "Oh, I'm actually here quite often," Amara explained patiently. "I'm usually waved right through. My name's Amara Jackson, I'm—" The guard's eyes narrowed as he finally looked up at her. His gaze flicked from her face to her neatly pressed pantsuit, then back again. "Like I said, ma'am. ID and visitor's pass. No exceptions." Amara felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the kind that always appeared in moments like this. She took a slow, controlled breath. "I understand you're just doing your job," she said evenly. "But I can assure you, I have every right to be here. If you just call up tow." "Listen, lady," the guard snapped, standing up from his chair. He was a head taller than Amara, his shoulders broad beneath his crisp white uniform. "I don't know who you think you are, but rules are rules. No ID, no entry. Now are you going to leave on your own, or do I need to escort you out?" For a moment, Amara was silent. She could feel the eyes of other people in the lobby on her, watching the scene unfold. A young man in a suit quickened his pace as he hurried past, averting his gaze. An older woman clutched her purse a little tighter. Amara straightened her spine, lifted her chin. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor, please." The guard snorted. "Yeah, good luck with that. Now are you leaving, or am I calling the cops?" Something hot and fierce flared in Amara's chest. She worked too hard, come too far, to be treated like this. Not again, not here. "You know what?" she said, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "I think I will leave, but I'll be back. And when I do—" She let the sentence trail off, meeting the guard's gaze with steely determination. He rolled his eyes, already turning away. "Whatever, lady. Just get out of here." Amara walked out of the lobby, her head held high. But as soon as she was out of sight, she slumped against the side of the building, letting out a shaky breath. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out her phone. "Mr. Goldstein," she said when her call was answered. "We need to move up that meeting. There's been an incident." 2 hours later, Amara stood outside those same glass doors, but this time she wasn't alone. Flanking her were Mr. Goldstein, a silver-haired man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and 2 sharply dressed women from Human Resources. "Are you sure about this, Amara?" Mr. Goldstein asked gently. "We could handle it more discreetly." Amara shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "This needs to be done, not just for me, but for anyone else who might face the same treatment." She pushed open the doors, striding purposefully towards the security desk. The same guard was there, his posture stiffening as he recognized her. "You again?" he growled, rising to his feet. "I told you." "Good morning." Amara cut him off, her voice clear and commanding. "I don't believe we were properly introduced earlier. I'm Amara Jackson, the new owner of Riverside Properties." She gestured to her companions. "This is Mr. Goldstein, our Chief Financial Officer, and representatives from HR. We're here to discuss your conduct this morning and your future with this company." The color drained from the guard's face as the realization hit him. His mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. "I think," Amara continued, her gaze unwavering, "we should take this conversation somewhere more private. Don't you?" As they walked towards the elevators, Amara could feel the eyes of everyone in the lobby on her once again. But this time, it felt different. This time, she saw respect, admiration, maybe even a glimmer of hope. The elevator doors slid open, and Amara stepped inside, the others following behind her. As she turned to face the lobby, she caught sight of a young black woman watching her with wide eyes. Amara gave her a small, encouraging smile just as the doors began to close. This was more than just about one security guard or one bad morning. This was about breaking down barriers, about challenging the assumptions that too often went unquestioned. It was about creating a world where no one would be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. As the elevator began its ascent, Amara took a deep breath. She knew the conversation ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be uncomfortable truths to face, hard decisions to make. She was ready. She'd been preparing for this moment her entire life. The elevator chimed as it reached the top floor. Amara straightened her jacket, squared her shoulders. It was time to get to work. The conference room on the top floor of Riverside Tower was silent as Amara took her seat at the head of the table. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the city below. But Amara's focus was entirely on the man seated across from her, his security guard uniform now wrinkled and damp with nervous sweat. Mr. Goldstein cleared his throat. "Now then, Mr." He glanced down at the file in front of him. "Mr. Pearson, would you care to explain your actions this morning?" The guard, Pearson, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I was just following protocol," he mumbled, not quite meeting anyone's eyes. "We've had issues with unauthorized access lately, and I was told to be extra vigilant." Amara leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "And did this vigilance extend to all visitors, Mr. Pearson, or just those who look like me?" Pearson's face flushed. "That's not. I didn't." He fumbled for words, then fell silent. One of the HR representatives, a woman with close-cropped gray hair, spoke up. "Mr. Pearson, we've reviewed the security footage from this morning. In the hour before Ms. Jackson arrived, you allowed 7 people to enter without checking their IDs. All of them were white." The room grew heavy with the weight of unspoken words. Amara watched Pearson carefully, noting the way his eyes darted around the room, the slight tremor in his hands. She'd seen this before, the moment when someone realized they'd been caught, when they couldn't hide behind excuses anymore. "I think," Amara said softly, "we need to have an honest conversation about what really happened this morning." As Pearson began to stammer out a response, Amara's mind drifted back to her childhood in Southside Chicago. She remembered her father, a city bus driver, coming home late one night with a black eye and a torn uniform. He tried to hide it from her, but she'd overheard him telling her mother about the drunk passenger who'd called him a racial slur and taken a swing at him. "Why didn't you fight back, Daddy?" she'd asked the next morning, her young heart burning with indignation. Her father had looked at her with tired eyes. "Because that's not how we win, baby girl," he'd said. "We win by being better, by working harder, by proving them wrong every single day." Those words had stayed with Amara through years of being the only black girl in her AP classes, through the snide comments and backhanded compliments at law school, through every boardroom where she'd had to fight twice as hard to be heard. And now here she was, owner of one of the largest property development companies in the city. She'd proven them wrong, just like her father said. But it wasn't enough. Not if people like Pearson were still making snap judgments based on nothing but the color of someone's skin. Amara tuned back into the conversation just as Pearson was finishing what sounded like a rehearsed apology. "And I promise it won't happen again. I learned my lesson." Mr. Goldstein glanced at Amara, clearly waiting for her to make the final decision. She could feel the weight of expectation from everyone in the room. It would be easy to fire Pearson on the spot, to make an example of him. Part of her wanted to, but another part remembered her father's words. "Mr. Pearson," Amara said, her voice steady, "I appreciate your apology. Words alone aren't enough. Actions have consequences, and there needs to be accountability." Pearson nodded, his shoulders slumping in resignation. "However," Amara continued, "I also believe in second chances and the power of education to create real change." She turned to the HR representatives. "I want a comprehensive diversity and inclusion training program implemented for all staff, starting immediately. Mr. Pearson, you'll be expected to take a leading role in this initiative, sharing your experience and what you've learned from it." Pearson's head snapped up, surprise etched across his face. "Additionally," Amara went on, "you'll be reassigned to our community outreach program for the next 6 months. You'll be working directly with the neighborhoods we serve, many of which are predominantly black and brown communities. It's time you got to know the people you've been so quick to judge." The room was silent for a moment as everyone processed her words. Then Mr. Goldstein spoke up, a note of admiration in his voice. "An excellent suggestion, Ms. Jackson. We'll begin implementing these changes right away." As the meeting wrapped up and people began to file out of the room, Amara remained seated, lost in thought. She knew her decision wouldn't be popular with everyone. Some would say she was too lenient, others that she was overreaching. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this was a pivotal moment, not just for her company, but for the larger conversation about race and power in America. A soft knock on the door interrupted her musings. She looked up to see Janet, her assistant, poking her head into the room. "Ms. Jackson, there's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent." Amara frowned. She didn't have any more meetings scheduled for today. "Who is it?" Janet hesitated. It's the young woman from the lobby this morning. The one who saw everything happen with the security guard. She's pretty insistent about speaking with you." Amara's eyebrows rose in surprise. She hadn't expected this development. What could the woman want? To complain? To offer support? Or was there something more going on here? After a moment's consideration, Amara nodded. "Send her in, please." As Janet left to fetch the visitor, Amara stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the city sprawled before her. She'd fought hard to get to where she was, to have the power to make real change. But with that power came responsibility, and complications she'd never anticipated. The door opened behind her, and Amara turned to face her unexpected guest, wondering what new challenge this encounter might bring. Amara turned to face the young woman who had just entered her office. She was probably in her mid-20s, with close-cropped natural hair and wide, expressive eyes that darted nervously around the room before settling on Amara. "Ms. Jackson," the woman said, her voice a mix of awe and determination. "I'm Zoe Thompson. I saw what happened in the lobby this morning." Amara gestured to one of the plush chairs facing her desk. "Please, have a seat, Ms. Thompson. What can I do for you?" Zoe perched on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "First, I wanted to thank you for standing up to that guard, for not backing down. It meant a lot to see that." A small smile tugged at the corner of Amara's mouth. "I appreciate that, but something tells me you didn't come all the way up here just to say thank you." Zoe took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. "You're right. I'm here because what happened to you this morning. It's not an isolated incident. Not in this building." Amara's eyebrows shot up. "Go on," she said, leaning forward slightly. "I work for Teclamina, the tech startup on the 15th floor," Zoe explained. "I've been there for about 6 months, and in that time, I've seen things, patterns. The way security treats visitors of color differently. The way some of the other companies in the building seem to have an awfully homogeneous workforce, if you know what I mean." Amara nodded slowly, her mind already racing with the implications. "And you brought this up to someone before?" Zoe's face fell. "I tried. I went to HR, I even emailed the building management, but nothing ever came of it. I was starting to think I was crazy or oversensitive or..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Until this morning," Amara finished for her. "Exactly." Zoe's eyes lit up with a fierce intensity. "When I saw you come back, when I realized who you were, I knew I had to take a chance. Because if anyone can do something about this, it's you." Amara leaned back in her chair, processing everything she'd just heard. On one level, she wasn't surprised. She knew all too well how pervasive these issues could be, but to hear it laid out so plainly, to realize it was happening right under her nose in a building she now owned, it stirred something deep within her, a mix of anger, determination, and a heavy sense of responsibility. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Miss Thompson," Amara said finally. "I assure you, I take these allegations very seriously. Can you provide me with any specific examples or documentation of what you witnessed?" Zoe nodded eagerly, reaching into her bag to pull out a thick manila folder. "I've been keeping records. Dates, times, names when I could get them. I even managed to get copies of some internal emails that, let's just say they're pretty damning." As Amara began to flip through the folder, her office door burst open. Mr. Goldstein hurried in, his face flushed with exertion. "Amara, we have a situation," he said, then stopped short when he saw Zoe. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were in a meeting." "It's all right, David," Amara said, standing up. "What's going on?" Mr. Goldstein glanced hesitantly at Zoe, then seemed to decide it didn't matter. "It's Pearson. He's gone to the press." He's claiming wrongful termination, saying we're pushing some kind of radical agenda. It's already hitting social media. Amara felt a headache building behind her eyes. She turned to Zoe, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. Miss Thompson, I'm afraid we'll have to continue this conversation later. Can you leave that folder with me? Zoe nodded, standing up quickly. Of course. And Ms. Jackson? Thank you for listening. It means more than you know. As Zoe left, Amara turned back to Mr. Goldstein. All right, let's deal with this. Get PR on the line, and I want our legal team prepped and ready. We're not going to let Pearson control this narrative. But even as she began to tackle this new crisis, Amara couldn't shake the weight of Zoe's folder sitting on her desk. She had a sinking feeling that Pearson was just the tip of a much larger iceberg. Across town, in a dimly lit bar, Marcus Pearson nursed a beer as he watched the local news on the TV above the bar. His own face stared back at him as the anchor discussed the developing story of his allegations against Riverside Properties. You sure about this, man? The bartender asked, eyeing the TV skeptically. Seems like you're picking a fight with some pretty big fish. Pearson took a long swig of his beer. They started it, he muttered. I was just doing my job. Now they want to make me out to be some kind of monster. Nah, I'm not going down without a fight. As he spoke, his phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number. He opened it to find a simple message. You did the right thing. We got your back. More to come. Pearson stared at the message, a mix of confusion and curiosity washing over him. Who was this mysterious ally? And what did they mean by more to come? Back at Riverside Tower, Zoe Thompson sat at her desk, her heart racing. She glanced around furtively before pulling up her email. With shaking hands, she began to type. It's done. I gave her the folder, but I don't know about this anymore. What if? She jumped as a hand clapped down on her shoulder. Everything all right, so? Her boss, a middle-aged man with a too-wide smile, loomed over her. Zoe quickly minimized her email. Ah yes, Mr. Reeves. Just finishing up some reports. Good, he said, his hand lingering a moment too long. Remember, we're all counting on you. For the greater good. As he walked away, Zoe felt a chill run down her spine. What had she gotten herself into? And more importantly, how was she going to get out? The next morning, Amara arrived at Riverside Tower before dawn, her mind racing with the events of the previous day. As she stepped out of her car, she noticed a small group of protesters gathered near the entrance, their signs bearing slogans like Stop the Woke Agenda and Protect Our Jobs. Amara took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was sure to be a challenging day. As she approached the entrance, a reporter thrust a microphone in her face. Ms. Jackson, how do you respond to allegations that you're pushing a radical agenda in your company? The reporter asked, her voice sharp and insistent. Amara paused, choosing her words carefully. Riverside Properties is committed to creating a fair and inclusive environment for all our employees and tenants. That's not a radical agenda, it's just good business. Inside the lobby, Amara noticed the new security guard on duty watching her warily. She gave him a nod as she passed, noting the way he seemed to relax slightly at her acknowledgement. Small steps, she reminded herself. Upstairs, her office was already bustling with activity. Mr. Goldstein was on the phone, his voice raised as he argued with someone. The head of PR was furiously typing at her laptop, likely crafting statements for the press. And in the corner, looking decidedly uncomfortable, sat Zoe Thompson. Ms. Thompson, Amara said, surprised. I wasn't expecting you this early. Zoe stood up quickly, wringing her hands. Ms. Jackson, I need to talk to you. In private. It's important. Amara nodded, leading Zoe into a small conference room and closing the door behind them. What's going on? Zoe took a shaky breath. I haven't been entirely honest with you. The information I gave you yesterday, it's real, but it's not the whole story. There's more going on here than you know. Before Zoe could continue, Amara's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Check your email. You'll want to see this. Frowning, Amara pulled up her email on her phone. At the top of her inbox was a message with no subject line, containing only a video attachment. She pressed play. The video showed a dimly lit room, where several men in expensive suits sat around a table. Amara recognized a few of them, CEOs of companies that rented space in Riverside Tower. And there, at the head of the table, was a face she knew all too well. Charles Reeves, CEO of Tecumina and Zoe's boss. "Gentlemen," Reeves was saying, his voice low and conspiratorial, "we have a problem. This new owner, Amara Jackson, she's not playing ball. If she starts digging too deep, asking too many questions, well, we could all find ourselves in hot water." One of the other men leaned forward. "So what do we do about it?" Reeves smiled, a cold, calculating expression. "We discredit her. Make her out to be the aggressor. I've already set things in motion with that security guard incident. And I've got someone on the inside feeding her just enough information to keep her busy, but not enough to actually threaten us." Amara's head snapped up, her eyes locking with Zoe's. The younger woman looked away, shame written across her face. "I'm so sorry," Zoe whispered. "I didn't know how deep it went when I agreed to help them, but I couldn't keep going along with it. That's why I came to you yesterday, why I'm here now. I want to make this right." Amara's mind was reeling. The discrimination Zoe had reported, Pearson's sudden media campaign, the protesters outside, it was all connected, all part of a larger scheme. But why? What were Reeves and the others trying to hide? Before she could respond, there was a commotion outside the conference room. Amara stepped out to see Marcus Pearson being escorted into the office by security, his face a mix of anger and fear. "I want to talk to Jackson," he was saying, his voice loud enough to carry across the room. "There's something she needs to know." As Amara approached him, she felt like she was standing on the edge of a precipice. In one hand, she held her phone with the damning video. In the other, she clutched the folder Zoe had given her the day before. And now here was Pearson, potentially holding another piece of the puzzle. The room fell silent as everyone turned to watch. Amara could feel the weight of all their eyes on her, waiting to see what she would do next. She took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. "All right, Mr. Pearson," she said, her voice calm despite the tension thrumming through her body. "Let's talk." As she led Pearson into her office, Amara caught sight of Mr. Goldstein's worried expression. She gave him a reassuring nod, even as her own heart raced with uncertainty. Whatever Pearson had to say, whatever was really going on in her building, she knew that the next few minutes would change everything. The door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving the rest of the office in tense silence. Through the glass walls of her office, they could see Amara and Pearson engaged in an intense conversation, their gestures becoming more animated by the second. Suddenly, Amara's eyes widened in shock. She reached for her phone, her fingers flying over the screen as she pulled something up. Pearson leaned in, his own expression a mix of surprise and vindication as he looked at whatever Amara was showing him. Outside, the elevator dinged. The doors slid open to reveal Charles Reeves, flanked by two men in suits who looked more like bodyguards than executives. Reeves strode into the office, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Zoe. His face darkened. "You?" he snarled, starting towards her. But before he could reach her, Amara's office door flew open. "Charles Reeves." Amara's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "I think it's time we had a chat." The room held its breath, the tension palpable as Reeves slowly turned to face Amara. Two titans of industry, standing on opposite sides of a battle neither had anticipated when they woke up that morning. In that moment, with accusations flying, secrets unraveling, and the future of Riverside Tower hanging in the balance, everyone knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The tension in the room was electric as Amara and Charles Reeves faced off. Reeves' initial shock had morphed into a smug smile, his composure returning as he straightened his tie. "Ms. Jackson," he said, his voice dripping with false politeness, "I'm not sure what you think you know, but I assure you—" "Save it, Charles." Amara cut him off, her voice sharp. "I know about the secret meetings, the coordinated efforts to undermine me, the discriminatory practices you've been hiding. It's over." Reeves' smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Accusations are easy to make, Amara. Proving them is another matter entirely. You really think you can take on all of us?" He gestured around, indicating the other powerful CEOs who rented space in the building. Amara was about to respond when her phone buzzed. She glanced down, her eyes widening as she read the message. Looking back up at Reeves, a slow smile spread across her face. "You're right, Charles," Accusations are easy. That's why I don't deal in accusations. I deal in facts. She turned to address the room at large. Ladies and gentlemen, I've just been informed that the FBI is on its way. It seems they're very interested in some financial irregularities they've uncovered. Irregularities that point to a massive money laundering operation being run right here in Riverside Tower. The room erupted in chaos. Reeves' face drained of color, while several of the other executives started shouting or trying to make calls. In the commotion, no one noticed Zoe step out of the room, her hand clutching a small flash drive. Amara raised her voice to be heard over the din. I suggest everyone stays put. The authorities will want to speak with all of you. As if on cue, the elevator dinged again, but instead of FBI agents, the doors opened to reveal a woman Amara had never seen before. She was older, perhaps in her 60s, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. Despite the chaos, she walked calmly into the room, her gaze fixed on Amara. Ms. Jackson, the woman said, her voice carrying easily over the noise, my name is Eleanor Blackwood. I believe we need to talk. Amara frowned, confusion momentarily replacing her triumph. I'm sorry, Miss Blackwood, but now isn't really the time. Oh, I think it is, Eleanor interrupted, pulling out a badge. Agent Eleanor Blackwood, FBI, and I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. The room fell silent, all eyes now on Eleanor and Amara. What do you mean, a misunderstanding? Amara asked, a sinking feeling in her stomach. Eleanor's expression was grim. The operation you've stumbled upon is much bigger than money laundering, Ms. Jackson. We've been investigating an international corporate espionage ring, one that's been using Riverside Tower as its base of operations for years. And I'm afraid, she paused, her eyes flickering to Zoe's now empty chair, that your young informant is right in the middle of it. Amara felt like the floor was tilting beneath her feet. Zoe? But she came to me, she wanted to expose. A carefully orchestrated play, Eleanor explained, designed to muddy the waters and keep you focused on internal politics while the real operation continued undetected. As the implications of Eleanor's words sank in, Amara realized with growing horror that Zoe was nowhere to be seen. She whirled around, her eyes scanning the room frantically. Where is she? Amara demanded. Where's Zoe? Mr. Goldstein, who had been quietly observing everything, suddenly spoke up. She left a few minutes ago, said something about needing some air. Eleanor's expression hardened. We need to find her now. That flash drive she was carrying? It likely contains everything we need to blow this whole operation wide open. As if things couldn't get any more complicated, Marcus Pearson stepped forward, his face a mask of confusion and anger. Wait a minute. Are you saying I was set up? That this whole thing was just a distraction? Eleanor nodded grimly. I'm afraid so, Mr. Pearson. You, Ms. Jackson, all of you, you were pawns in a much larger game. The realization hit Amara like a physical blow. Everything she thought she knew, everything she'd been fighting for, it had all been orchestrated. She'd been so focused on battling discrimination and corporate politics that she'd missed the bigger picture entirely. But there was no time to dwell on her mistakes. Zoe was out there, with crucial evidence in her possession, and if Eleanor was right, she was at the heart of a conspiracy that went far beyond anything Amara had imagined. We need to find her, Amara said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Before it's too late. Eleanor nodded approvingly. Agreed. Miss Jackson, I think it's time we combined our resources. Are you ready to see how deep this rabbit hole really goes? As Amara looked around the room, at the shocked faces of the executives, at Pearson's bewildered expression, at the determined set of Eleanor's jaw, she knew that everything was about to change. Again, the real battle was just beginning, and the stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. I'm ready, Amara said, her voice firm. Let's go. As they hurried towards the elevator, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, Zoe was watching, waiting. And the next move in this dangerous game could determine not just the fate of Riverside Tower, but potentially the security of the entire nation. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Amara, Eleanor, and a team of FBI agents combed through every inch of Riverside Tower, questioning employees and searching for any sign of Zoe. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city, they regrouped in Amara's office, frustration etched on every face. She's gone, Eleanor said, her voice tight with barely contained anger. Somehow, she managed to slip past every security measure we put in place. Amara slumped into her chair, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on her. I can't believe I fell for it, she murmured. I was so sure I was doing the right thing. Eleanor's expression softened slightly. Don't be too hard on yourself, Ms. Jackson. So fooled a lot of people. She's one of the best operatives I've ever encountered. Just then, Amara's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her eyes widening. It's her, she said, holding up the phone for Eleanor to see. So just send me a message. Eleanor leaned in, reading aloud. Rooftop. Come alone. 10 minutes. It's a trap, one of the FBI agents said immediately. We can't let you go up there alone, Ms. Jackson. But Amara was already standing, a determined glint in her eye. Maybe it is a trap, but it's also our best chance to end this. I'm going. After a heated debate, a compromise was reached. Amara would go to the rooftop, but with a hidden microphone and a team of agents positioned discreetly nearby. As she stepped into the elevator for the final ride up, Amara took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead. The rooftop was bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun when Amara emerged. Zoe stood at the far end, her back to the city skyline, the flash drive clutched tightly in her hand. I'm glad you came, Zoe said, her voice carrying on the evening breeze. I wasn't sure you would, after everything. Amara took a few steps forward, keeping her voice calm. Why, Zoe? Why go through all of this? Zoe's laugh was bitter. You really don't get it, do you? This was never about money laundering or corporate espionage. Those were just covers for the real operation. Which is what? Amara pressed, taking another cautious step forward. Zoe held up the flash drive. This contains the access codes to a satellite network. One that can control every piece of connected technology in the country. Imagine it, Amara, the power to shut down power grids, manipulate financial markets, even control autonomous vehicles. All at the push of a button. Amara felt a chill run down her spine. And you're going to, what? Sell it to the highest bidder. Oh, we're way past that, Zoe said, a hint of madness creeping into her voice. This isn't about money anymore. It's about reshaping the world. Creating true equality by leveling the playing field. No more corporations, no more governments. Just people starting over. That's insane, Amara said, taking another step. You can't just erase everything and expect. Stop right there, Zoe snapped, pulling out a gun and aiming it at Amara. I didn't want it to come to this, but I will use this if I have to. The plan is already in motion. In a few minutes, this drive will upload its contents to our secure server, and there will be no stopping it. Amara's mind raced, searching for a way out. She opened her mouth to speak, to try and reason with Zoe one last time, when suddenly a new voice cut through the tension. Drop the weapon, Zoe. It's over. Both women turned to see Eleanor emerging from behind an air conditioning unit, her own gun trained steadily on Zoe. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Zoe's eyes darted between Amara and Eleanor, desperation etched on her face. She raised her gun, aiming it at Eleanor. Amara, acting on pure instinct, lunged forward. A shot rang out. Amara hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of her. She looked up, expecting to see blood carnage. Instead, she saw Zoe on her knees, the gun skittering across the rooftop, the flash drive lying forgotten beside her. Eleanor rushed forward, quickly restraining Zoe. As she did, Amara noticed something strange. Eleanor's badge, which had fallen open during the scuffle, looked off. The hologram was wrong, the edges too crisp. Wait, Amara said, her voice hoarse. Your badge. It's. Eleanor's eyes met Amara's, and in that moment, understanding passed between them. With lightning speed, Eleanor scooped up the flash drive and sprinted for the edge of the roof. No, Zoe screamed, struggling against her restraints. You don't understand. She's not FBI. She's. But her words were lost as Eleanor reached the edge of the roof and, to Amara's utter shock, leaped off. For a heart-stopping moment, Amara thought she was witnessing a suicide. Then, with a roar of engines, a sleek black helicopter rose into view, Eleanor clinging to a rope ladder dangling from its side. As the helicopter banked away, Eleanor's voice crackled over Amara's hidden earpiece one last time. "Thanks for the assist, Ms. Jackson. You've been an excellent pawn." Amara stared after the retreating helicopter, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. The real FBI team burst onto the roof moments later, but it was too late. Eleanor, or whoever she really was gone, along with the flash drive and all its devastating potential. As the agents swarmed around her and Zoe, securing the scene and calling for backup, Amara remained rooted to the spot, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the helicopter had disappeared. She had started this day thinking she was fighting against discrimination in her building. Now, she found herself at the center of an international conspiracy with stakes higher than she could have ever imagined. And somehow she knew this was only the beginning. The days following the rooftop confrontation passed in a whirlwind of debriefings, interrogations, and media frenzy. Amara found herself at the center of a storm, her face plastered across every news channel as the story of corporate espionage, false identities, and a narrowly averted technological catastrophe captivated the nation. Riverside Tower, once a symbol of corporate success, now stood as a reminder of how easily appearances could be deceiving. The building hummed with activity as federal agents combed through every office, every computer, searching for any remaining traces of the conspiracy that had taken root within its walls. Amara sat in her office, staring out at the city skyline, her mind still reeling from the events of the past week. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called, turning to see Mr. Goldstein enter, looking as exhausted as she felt. "The last of the FBI agents are leaving," he said, collapsing into a chair across from her. "They say they've gathered all the evidence they need for now." Amara nodded, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "And how much of our building is left standing?" Mr. Goldstein chuckled weakly. "Structurally? All of it. Reputation-wise, that might take a bit more work to rebuild." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, both contemplating the enormity of the task ahead. Finally, Amara spoke. "Have you heard anything about Zoe?" Mr. Goldstein's expression turned grim. "She's cooperating with the authorities. Turns out, she was in pretty deep, but she wasn't the mastermind. They're hoping her testimony will help them track down this Eleanor character and the rest of the organization." Amara nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Anger at Zoe's betrayal, pity for the young woman who'd gotten in over her head, and a nagging sense of guilt that she hadn't seen through the deception sooner. "And Pearson?" she asked, remembering the security guard who'd unwittingly played a part in the whole scheme. "Cleared of all wrongdoing," Mr. Goldstein replied. "He's been offered his job back, with a substantial raise and apology. Though between you and me, I think he's considering other options. This whole experience has been quite eye-opening for him." Amara couldn't help but agree. It had been eye-opening for all of them. Over the next few weeks, Amara threw herself into the work of rebuilding, not just Riverside Properties' reputation, but the trust and sense of community within the building itself. She instituted new, transparent policies for hiring and promotion, ensuring that diversity and inclusion were more than just buzzwords. The discriminatory practices that Zoe had initially reported, though exaggerated and manipulated for the conspiracy's purposes, had held kernels of truth. Amara was determined to root out those issues once and for all. She'd also reached out to the other companies in the building, working to create a coalition dedicated to ethical business practices and genuine corporate responsibility. It wasn't easy. Trust had been severely shaken, but slowly, progress was made. 1 month after the rooftop incident, Amara stood in the lobby of Riverside Tower, addressing a gathered crowd of employees, tenants, and media. "What happened here was a wake-up call," she began, her voice clear and strong. "We were all so focused on our individual pursuits, our corporate ladder climbing, that we failed to see the bigger picture. We failed to see each other." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces before her. "But from this failure comes an opportunity to do better, to be better. To create a workplace and a community where everyone is valued, where diversity is celebrated, and where we look out for one another." As she continued her speech, outlining the changes and initiatives that would be implemented, Amara caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Marcus Pearson stood near the back, nodding along with her words. When their eyes met, he gave her a small smile and a thumbs up. Amara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. After the speech, as the crowd dispersed and reporters clamored for additional comments, Amara's phone buzzed with a news alert. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the headline. International Task Force closes in on Phantom Hacker. Connection to Riverside Tower incident suspected. For a moment, Amara allowed herself to hope that this might finally be the end of it, that Eleanor and her organization would be brought to justice. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered caution. If this experience had taught her anything, it was that things were rarely as simple as they appeared. As if on cue, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. Well played, Ms. Jackson, but the game is far from over. Until next time. E. Amara stared at the message, a chill running down her spine. She thought about reporting it to the FBI, but something held her back. Instead, she deleted the message and slipped her phone back into her pocket. Whatever came next, she would be ready. That evening, as the sun set over the city, casting Riverside Tower in a warm golden glow, Amara stood on the rooftop, the same spot where everything had come to a head just a month ago. The wind whipped around her, carrying with it the sounds of the city below. She thought about everything that had happened, everything she had learned, about discrimination and prejudice, about the dangers of assumptions and the importance of looking beyond the surface, about trust and betrayal and the fine line between justice and vengeance. But most of all, she thought about responsibility. The responsibility that came with power, with ownership, with leadership. The responsibility to do better, to be better, every single day. As she turned to leave, Amara caught her reflection in one of the rooftop windows. She saw a woman who had been tested, who had stumbled, but who had ultimately risen to the challenge. A woman who was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever before. The elevator dimmed as it reached the ground floor, and Amara stepped out into the lobby. The night security guard, a new hire, part of the building's fresh start, nodded respectfully as she passed. "Good night, Ms. Jackson," he said. "Good night," Amara replied with a warm smile, "and please call me Amara." As she pushed through the revolving doors and out into the night, Amara felt a sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and undoubtedly more surprises. The shadow of Eleanor and her organization still loomed, a reminder that the fight for justice and equality was far from over. But for the first time in a long while, Amara felt truly hopeful. She had seen firsthand the damage that prejudice and greed could do, but she had also witnessed the power of perseverance, of standing up for what was right, even in the face of overwhelming odds. As she walked down the street, the lights of Riverside Tower shining behind her, Amara made a silent promise to herself, to her employees, and to the city she called home. She would continue to fight, to learn, to grow. She would use her position and her voice to create real, lasting change. Because in the end, that's what true leadership was all about. Not just managing a company or owning a building, but setting an example, being the change you wanted to see in the world. And as for Eleanor, and whatever challenges lay ahead, well, Amara would be ready. After all, she had learned from the best. The game might not be over, but this time she knew the rules, and she was playing to win. The story of Riverside Tower, of discrimination overcome, of conspiracies unraveled, of lessons learned and bridges built, was far from over. But with each passing day, with each small victory, and each person touched by the changes being made, a new chapter was being written. And Amara Jackson, the woman who had started it all with a simple refusal to be turned away, was holding the pen.